Hey, welcome back. This is Mississippi Stories. I'm the editor-at-large at Mississippi Today, Marshall Ramsey. Thank you for joining us. Got a guest today you probably already know, to be honest with you. If you've ever read a sports section in the state of Mississippi, you've probably seen one of his articles or one of his columns. I've been blessed to work with him for 25 years, pretty much off and on. Rick Cleveland's a native of Hattiesburg, Mississippi, and a resident of Jackson. He has been Mississippi Today's sports columnist since 2016. Rick, I can't believe it's been that long already.
Yeah,
That's hard to believe it. I mean, you've been there 5 years. That's great.
5 years, yeah.
Yeah. So you and Mississippi Today are celebrating that same birthday together. We'll talk about that in a little bit. You graduated as Southern Miss with a bachelor's in journalism. You didn't really have a choice on that, and we'll talk about that too. You of course have worked. I didn't realize you worked in Monroe at the News Star World. Excuse me. You were at the Daily News and the Clarion Ledger, where I worked with you there. You were sports editor at Hattiesburg at the Hattiesburg American, executive director of the Mississippi Sports Hall of Fame, which you did that right after you left the Clarion Ledger. You've worked as a syndicated columnist and celebrated sports writer, of course. You've appeared in numerous magazines, periodicals, and newspapers. I dare say that when you were the executive director at the Hall of Fame, you pretty much covered everybody who was in the Hall of Fame at one point or the other. In your career. You've been recognized 13 times as a Mississippi Sports Writer of the Year, the recipient of multiple awards and honors for your reporters and writing. In fact, I think one of my favorite things you've ever written, and it was so incredibly powerful, is when the Yazoo City tornado blew through. They had you, and I mean everybody, all hands on deck, going out and covering it. And you wrote a story about a mother who had protected her child in a mobile home that had gotten hit by the tornado, and damned if that wasn't one of the most powerful things I've ever read.
It still affects me today. She actually put her kids in the bathtub and then laid on top of them, and she was killed, but she saved their lives. Yeah, it was unbelievable. Marshall, writing's writing. If you can sit down and watch a football game and write about it, you can go cover a tornado or an execution or a hurricane, or which are all things that, or election or whatever, which is, if writing's writing, you just try to tell a story and make it interesting,
Well, it's the same way about the old radio guys that covered, that were in radio. They were sitting there painting pictures literally with words so that people can hear it. But you're having to do it when you're a sports writer, and I don't think people understand this. A lot of writers, you might have the whole day to sit there and craft a story, call sources and everything else. You've probably done 1.5 zillion stories when you had absolutely no time left, and you had to deal with technology that was a little bit, more archaic than painting on cave walls to be able to get that story out there now. And it's I think that's something that makes you just that much of a better writer, is having that urgency underneath you to make you have to come up with the idea.
Yeah, there was a triple overtime game down at Tiger Stadium one time. Mississippi State and LSU were playing, and it was an ESPN 7:30 game, so it went past our deadline, and they were actually holding the paper for the game story and my column. And so I was writing 2 different columns on a split screen computer, and one of them had LSU winning and one of them had Mississippi State winning. You have to. I mean, you're only going to have 30 seconds to finish it up. When the game ends, you got to pretty much have an idea what it's going to be. And so got home the next morning. You'll appreciate this, because my brother called me at home and said, "Brother, have you checked your email?" And I said, "Bobby, it's 7:00. I got home 3 hours ago." He said, "Well, you need to just go ahead and check your email." My email box had about 300 emails, mostly from irate LSU fans, because they put the right column, the one with LSU winning, in the newspaper, but in our own line, on the Clarion Ledger's own line, they put the column with Mississippi State winning.
Oh, no.
And I had, like I say, I had over 300 emails, and the funniest one was from a guy who said he was on an oil rig in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, and even he knew who won the damn game.
I think about that. I think about my career and all the hate mail I've gotten and all the people I've made mad, I would dare say that my stuff is nowhere near as bad as some of the stuff that you've received over the years. People are so incredibly passionate about sports.
Well, they are passionate, and that's what makes it a lot of what makes it fun.
Yeah.
But the thing is, especially when I was at the Clarion Ledger, and we were the only statewide circulated newspaper. Anything you wrote was going to make at least 2/3 of the state mad.
Right.
If you covered, I mean, it doesn't matter if what you wrote was accurate or not. If their team lost, they weren't happy about reading it.
Well, and you think about most newspapers, you might be covering one college team, so like say you're in Athens, you're in Atlanta. Well, Atlanta's too, but I mean, if say you're Knoxville, you're covering Tennessee, for instance. But you're covering, you've got Southern Miss, you've got Ole Miss, you've got State, there's Jackson State, there's all these different passionate programs. So you're usually damned if you do, damned if you don't, because no matter what you write, I mean, and one thing about your writing, I mean, you're always very brutally honest about stuff. You're not a homer in any sense of the thing, but everybody's convinced that you're for the other guy, no matter what you write.
Yeah, it's like I remember when the Clarion Ledger put out that book of my columns back around the turn of the century.
Yeah, but 1900, wasn't it? Because I remember I think I did a drawing for you for that book.
1999, I believe. Anyway, the cover that somebody took, I think Keith Warren took the cover photo in the press box at Scott Field.
Yeah.
So my press pass said, and it was at the Egg Bowl, and the press pass, of course, said Mississippi State on it.
Oh.
And people got mad as hell about that. How could you put that? And then the funniest letter I got was one from a guy said the press box at Southern Miss is named after your daddy. You think you'd have gotten your picture taken there,
Well, tell us a little bit about your dad, because I mean, getting one of the joys of working at the Clarion Ledger and the editorial department back in the day was that we sat right next to the sports department, and I probably saw more Bobby than I did of you, because you and I used to joke we'd see each other every 6 months and wave at each other, and we kind of do that now, and we still work together. Yeah. But I mean, I always loved the stories that Bobby would tell, and I love the stories that you tell. But your mom and dad were pretty influential on who you became and what you do.
Well, my dad was sports editor of the Hattiesburg American when I was born, and then about 20 months later, Mama got pregnant with Bobby, and Ace went in, and my daddy's name was Ace. He went in and asked for a raise, and they said, "Well, we'll give you $2 more a week," or something like that. So we left and went to Jackson, and he was sports editor of the Jackson Daily News for a year. And then a job opened back up in Hattiesburg at Southern Miss as the PR director for the school. And we moved back there, and that's where I was raised. And my mama worked at the campus bookstore, and Ace did the sports publicity for Southern Miss for like 30 years. And so I was raised on it. He was actually a dairy farmer's son. He was the youngest of 6, and he said he could not wait to do something besides milk cows at 4:30 in the morning.
Did he encourage you to write?
Oh no, Marshall. When I was 13 years old, and actually that's when I started writing at the Hattiesburg American. But when I told him I wanted to do that, he said, "Oh no," he said, "if you're smart enough to do that and do it well, you can make," I'm not going to use the words he used, but he said, "you can make a whole lot more money doing something else." And by God, that was 55 years ago. And I can tell you, he was correct.
Did you have the same conversation with Tyler, your son, when he started writing?
Yeah, and I didn't do any better than my daddy did. And my daddy had the same conversation with my brother, and that didn't work out either. All that said,
it worked out great though.
I wouldn't trade any of the memories and the fun that I've had doing what I do. So yeah, but I mean, he was right. I could have made a whole lot more money doing something else.
I tell you, you're right. I mean, I've talked to my boys a little bit about, what I've done and everything. And I think probably the thing I've enjoyed the most of it, getting to work with you and everybody at the Clarion Ledger back when I first started. I started there in 96. So, I mean, at that point, things were still running on full, all cylinders and everything else. The sports department was still overflowing. I worked with Orly, Billy, you, Bobby, David Hampton and all that crew. But
Well,
also,
you missed Ace because he passed in 95.
yeah,
So he came on and he was a regular visitor up there.
I know. I hate I missed him, but I feel like I got a little bit of his spirit with Bobby.
Yeah, well, Bobby is my daddy made over.
Yeah,
No doubt about it.
oh, I walked in there literally the first week I was at the paper, Bobby had already told me 2 of the best dirty jokes I know. And then his computer caught on fire. I remember one day I walked in, his computer was smoking black smoke. And I'm thinking, what kind of crazy place have I moved into? One of the other reporters was asleep over there in the corner. But it was like a bunch of characters on that. But
well, when I say Bobby is Ace made over, I mean it in the best way. He's got that same dry, sometimes evil sense of humor.
yeah. Well, you're right. I mean, and I think about all the people you've gotten to cover and gotten to be friends with over the years. And I mean, people don't understand quite how special Mississippi really is, because it's just the quality, of the athletes that, you've been able to cover are obviously world-class athletes have come out of Mississippi, and you've had a chance to get to know them and get to cover them. But also too, just generally, it's just an interesting place to actually get to do what you do for a living.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, I've said it a million times. I mean, where else could you, grow up writing about the guy who was the leading rusher in the NFL for so many years and still ranks second, I think, on the all-time list. The leading receiver, the leading touchdown scorer, the leading total offense producer in the history of NCAA football. I mean, all those people came from small town Mississippi, and that's just one sport. I mean, we got, basketball players, baseball players, track and field athletes, some of the most talented athletes in the history of the world just so happen to come from small town Mississippi.
Madden, Mississippi, or Kill, Mississippi, or Drew, Mississippi, you name it. I mean,
Crawford, some places that are unincorporated Mississippi, like Crawford, where Jerry Rice is from. I've always said you can go to the state high school basketball or football championships, take a page out of your notebook, fold it into a paper airplane, sail it, and wherever it lands, there's going to be an interesting story somewhere,
Well, I've really enjoyed, I mean, like I said, we were there at the Clarion Ledger. You left, I guess, a couple years, 2012 or somewhere around that
2012.
Yeah, it was right after I got made part-time, and then there was the buyout, and you left and you went to the Hall of Fame at that point you filled in after Rubenstein.
Yeah, when Rube passed away, Michael Rubenstein, who had been the only executive director the Hall of Fame ever had.
Yeah, that was kind of his baby.
He and I had both been on the planning process of the Hall of Fame. We were very much a part of the startup. And they called me, and it was at the same time that the Clarion Ledger was offering the buyout for anybody with who was 55 years or older and had 20 years of experience, and the two things dovetailed,
Yeah.
And I remember I went to I think we were between editors at the time, and I walked into the publisher's office and I said, well, I think I'm going to take this. And she said, I don't think you should. And I said, well, they're offering me such and such amount of money to come to the Hall of Fame. That's more than I'm making now. What would you offer me to stay? And she said,
bye-bye.
yeah. It's been nice.
Yeah, no, I know. I worked for her too. I remember her very well. But yeah, no, that was a big shift for you though, because it was like you went from, getting to seek out great stories to write about and everything else. And you enjoyed it, but it was a lot of day to day just having to go, go, go. And of course the fundraising aspect of it. And I mean, the good news is you knew everybody in the state. So that part of it was pretty easy, but it was just different. And I think a lot of us, when we get out of that working for the newspaper and then suddenly go into doing something else, it's like suddenly you're like, oh wow, I really miss what I used to do. So
Yeah,
I'm glad Mississippi Today, opened up for you.
I enjoyed the 4 years I spent at the Hall of Fame. I thought we got a lot done. It was still telling Mississippi stories in a whole different format. And at the same time, I worked as a syndicated sports columnist. I wrote a once a week column that ran in like 30 something newspapers. So I kept my hand in it.
Yeah.
And then when the thing happened with Mississippi Today, I just thought it was a time in my life that I wanted to get back to what I really love doing. So I did.
Yeah, it did. And it gives you obviously a little bit of flexibility. You and your wife can travel, you can go to New Orleans to eat or whatever, but you're still on the road quite a bit and covering quite a few events still.
Yeah. And the Hall of Fame, I should say this, is in great hands with Bill Blackwell.
Yeah, he's great.
Who's doing a superb job during really, really difficult circumstances that we've all been through in the last year. It's been this last year, Marshall, for me has been the strangest time.
Yeah.
I mean, the year 2020 was the first year of my life, including the year I was born, that I haven't been to a football game.
Wow.
Think about that.
No. Yeah.
I mean, I just, because the protocols and the fact that if I wasn't going to be, even if I wasn't scared for my own well-being, I didn't want to expose people at home and all that. So it was just different.
Have you and Liz gotten vaccinated? Or you guys?
We've had them both. Yeah.
Oh, good. Yeah. Congrats on that.
We got our second shots and waited 10 days and went to New Orleans for 8 days.
That's a great place to test it out and see if it works.
It was a wonderful time. Yeah.
I tell you, I mean, seriously, when more and more people get vaccinated, I interviewed Tom Ramsey, the chef, who of course had COVID and he just got past it and everything. But he said that, in his restaurant that suddenly he's looking around and seeing people that are over 65 years old in the restaurant again. It's like it's almost freedom. It's like suddenly you're let out of jail. Let's go celebrate.
It almost is like getting a get out of jail free card. It's what it felt like, and I can't wait. I can't wait to cover some college baseball games.
Oh my gosh, incredible! I mean, some really great baseball this year in Mississippi too.
Oh, we got. I think Ole Miss and Mississippi State both, have the pitching, hitting, overall team makeup to win it all.
Yeah.
I mean, you have to be playing very well at the right time. Baseball's a funny sport. The 27 Yankees lost, I think, 3 or 4 times to the lowly Washington Senators. I mean, things happen in baseball, but both of those teams, I think, have what it takes to win the national championship. And Southern Miss could easily win a regional or super regional. I'm not sure they have the overall depth to win it all, but you never know in baseball.
That was one of the things about the pandemic last year when they started canceling everything. I mean, Ole Miss's baseball team was just stacked and they were on fire, and then suddenly it was over.
I think they won 18 in a row.
Yeah.
Before it ended. Mike Bianco won National Coach of the Year.
Yeah.
He was 18-1. Yeah. But I mean, that they could have won it last year. State could have won it last year. It's people always are talking about that Mississippi is a football state, probably
Oh,
because of some
yeah,
of those people
yeah,
that we talked about,
yeah.
and we have produced some of the greatest football players ever. But if you look at what we really do well and what we support the best, is probably baseball.
Yeah. Yeah, I got to admit, I mean, of all the places I've ever lived, I've never seen college baseball, A, embraced like it is here, but B, the environment when you actually go into the stadium is way better than most of the major league stadiums. It's just so much fun to go to our college games.
Well, where else would you see a school tear down a perfectly, probably a park that already ranked in the top 20 in the nation, and then build a $67 million new facility right where the old one was, which is what
Right.
Mississippi State did. Yeah.
That's it. And they feel it. I mean, it's just that they're going to pay for it probably fairly quickly, I would
And
imagine.
it's not just State and Ole Miss and Southern Miss. I mean, Jackson State has usually one of the SWAC's top programs, and Delta State is one of the top 3 or 4 Division II programs in the country. A tradition that began with one of my favorite people I ever covered in Mississippi sports, Boo Ferris,
Yeah.
and continued on with Mike Kennison, and they've got something special going there too.
Talk about Boo for a second. I mean, there are some people when they pass away and they're in their 90s and you mourn because they've died too soon. That's kind of the way Boo Ferris was. I mean, just what an impact. Everything he touched, he just had a huge impact on.
Yeah, he was, he was 94 when he passed, and he probably touched more people. I mean, he'd be right in there with Governor Winter.
Yeah.
As far
They
as
do remind me of each other. Yeah.
the number of people that the two of them, the influence they had, and the number of people that they touched. Just an amazing man, and still of all the things I've ever done in sports journalism, him letting me write his biography is at the top of the list.
And it was excellent too. I mean, it was just a great read. I was up in Knoxville this summer or last summer, whenever COVID. I don't even know what month is this anyway. I mean, it's just like a time is off. Anyway, I went to an event and Peyton was there, Cooper was there, Archie and Olivia were there. And I had done some drawings and Peyton had wanted me to do it. So it was neat. I got to meet them all. I'd never met Peyton before. And I walked up and introduced myself to Archie and Olivia. And I said, hi, I used to work with Rick Cleveland. And they were like, we love Rick. It was like, great. So thank you. I appreciate that. I don't get to, it was kind of neat to get to drop your name.
Well, he's Archie. He ranks right up there with all of them as far as the way he has handled his success and his son's successes, and there's something I don't know if it's something that just comes out of the Delta or from that generation, but they just treat people the way you want to be treated. I mean, and Archie and Boo are the best 2 examples of that I know.
I was going to ask you who have been your favorite people to cover since you've been. I figure they'd be 1 and 2 or 2 and 1.
Both of them would be in the top, but Davey Whitney, who was the old basketball coach at Alcorn State, who, just came along, probably 30 years before he would have made millions and millions of dollars as a basketball coach. He came, there weren't the big schools and the NBA teams weren't really hiring African Americans when Davey came along, but he was he's right in there with the best basketball coaches I ever covered, and a dear friend as well. it was really a lot of fun to cover Victoria Vivian's and that Mississippi State basketball team with Vic Schaefer and I mean, here in the last few years, I covered 2 women's Final Four, that they were responsible for. And I remember covering her when she set the national scoring record for high school at Scott Central over in Forest, and them stopping the game and her handing me the basketball for the Mississippi Sports Hall of Fame. I won't ever forget that. There's been so many of them, and so many that aren't nationally famous, who have meant a lot to me.
That's the great thing about sports, though. I mean, it's, you don't necessarily have to have the record or be on the wall in a photograph. The stories that are behind it, the comebacks, the resilience, just general humanity. That's what makes sports so.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like training wheels for life,
Yeah, and sometimes it comes at places that you don't expect it. I remember covering the best football game I've ever covered was Weir, W-E-I-R, played Mize. 2 4-letter words, 2 little they were 1A football schools in the state championship game at Memorial Stadium, and it went right down to the wire. And at the end, players on both sides were crying, one because they won and one because they lost,
Yeah.
And I guarantee you, anybody who was able from either one of those towns was there at that game.
That's the thing. And, I mean, I lived in Texas for a while, and I think Texas also, the Friday Night Lights thing, obviously that's been made famous, but I really think that in a way that Mississippi towns relate more to high school football here than they even did in Texas. And that's just, I mean, Texas is a lot, but it's amazing how towns, just completely relate to what goes on Friday night.
Well, I've always said if you were going to be a robber, a house robber for your living,
right?
Friday nights when the town football team is on the road, that's because if you've ever been to those games, the sheriffs and the deputies are there too.
Exactly. Yeah. Forget funerals. Just go during the football.
Well, they lead the way to the ball games. So
exactly. So I was talking a little bit earlier when you were talking about deadlines and writing, and of course the newspaper business. I mean, I think about how much it's changed since I've been in, and I've been in, I guess I'm trying to do the math, 35 years. And, I mean, it used to be that literally if one of my cartoons showed up on the page, it had been reproduced 7 times, so I mean, a lot of stuff, but I mean, just the technology changed. But unfortunately, of course, the technology also caused newspapers to suffer a lot of damage and cutbacks too. Now it's like you can't even get a deadline story because the deadlines are at 5 o'clock in the afternoon on printing on the newspaper. So you can't even get stuff in till the next day. But now that you're at Mississippi Today, you literally can hit with your brand new computer, by the way, congratulations. It was a great column about that. But you can literally hit send, somebody can edit it, get it up on the page, and you've literally got the story up just moments after you finished it.
Exactly. It's amazing the way it's changed. In the early days, I mean, I remember when I was at the Hattiesburg American, 14, 15 years old, going to a game in Bassville or Lumberton or Loosedale, places like that, and calling back to the newspaper and reading what I had written over the phone to somebody else, just hoping they got it right. And hoping they corrected my mistakes as well. But it's just changed so much.
I was talking with Curtis Wilkie, and he was talking about when he worked for the Boston Globe, he'd have that situation where somebody'd be, listening to his story, and they would completely not understand his accent. and would
No,
mangle his stories every time.
and he could barely understand the people with the Boston accents
Yeah.
too, I guarantee you.
Yeah.
Curtis is one of those real Mississippi treasures.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
He wrote what is still the best newspaper lead I have ever read. It was when he was covering the Neshoba County Fair. I think the year would have been 1959 or 60. And he covered Ross Barnett's, one of his campaign speeches. And his lead said that 10,000 fairgoers in Neshoba County today dined on fried chicken, potato salad, and demagoguery.
Well, that leads me to, I guess, to probably a pretty important question. And one thing I always was impressed with you and with Orly is that y'all seemed like you knew so many great writers and were friends with them and everything. What writers influenced you the most over the years? Because I mean, I can name off 5 or 6 cartoonists that pretty much is why I'm sitting here right now.
Yeah, well, my dad certainly was one, but Willie Morris was
Yeah.
a tremendous influence on me. I met him, I had read him, but I met him when he came back to Ole Miss as a writer in residence in 1980 or 81. I'm not sure which, but somewhere in there. And, in the first 10 minutes we were together, I told him my daddy had bought me an Underwood typewriter at age 13, and he told me his daddy had bought him an Olivetti at 13. And he told me about the first story he wrote for the Yazoo Herald, and I told him about the first one I wrote for the Hattiesburg American, and we just went from there. And and he gave advice that you could really use. I mean, I remember telling him my daddy's advice to me was to always try to write a story the way you tell it.
Yeah.
He said, well, I've always tried to do that too, but I've always tried to write it with a friend in mind that I was telling it to, because he said, I think it makes it more personal. And those are 2 of the best writing tips I ever got.
That's incredible. Yeah. Yeah.
The first game I covered was a Lucedale Brooklyn game. Now that would be George County, Forest County AHS because of consolidation. But back then it was Lucedale and Brooklyn, and got back home, rolled in the paper in my typewriter and at the kitchen table, and Dad left the room, and he came back 30 minutes later and he looked, and that typewriter was still clean and white. And he said something again that I can't say right now, but he said, what's wrong, son? And I said, Dad, I can't get started. How do you get started? And he said, well, just write it the way you tell it. And it's still because you think about it, if you're telling a story to a friend, if you try to start out with the most interesting, important detail there is, and then you continue to tell it in a way where you're trying to keep their interest.
Yeah.
I mean,
right.
That's it. That's writing. That's storytelling. And that's what we're doing. That's what I'm doing every day. I'm telling stories,
When you talk about Willie, and one of the first gifts I got when I announced that I was moving here from my editor in San Diego was she gave me North Toward Home.
Sure.
Yeah. She said, if you're going to be successful there, you have to learn how to create sense of place the way Willie Morris does, and she was right. I mean, she just said, this is what you need to learn to do, and it was, I've always been very grateful for that. But that was the thing. You could literally read his, writing and you would start sweating from the humidity, or you could smell the Delta, he'd just be able, he was such a great storyteller like that.
Somebody asked me the other day, somebody was moving to town. So I had a friend moving to town and wanted suggestions for what they should read about Mississippi. my first suggestion was My Mississippi by
Yeah.
Willie, because
Yeah.
it takes you on his road trip around Mississippi.
Oh
And
yeah.
it still works.
It does, you know, and I thought an underrated book, but one that I enjoyed just because I knew most of the players in it, and was The Courting of Marcus Dupree.
Oh, very underrated.
Yeah.
Very underrated book.
And I think if Marcus had not gotten injured and had the career that he was, you know, destined to have, I think that book probably would have just been all over the place. But it's just so much fun. I think he poor line about Lee Ragland about what he said, how could anybody nicknamed Scoop be scooped like that or something like that. And so every time I see Lee, I just kind of laughed a little bit.
It's a terrific
Great book.
book, and it's not really about football at all.
No. It's about it's about humanity on that as
Yeah.
well. We're, you know, talking a little bit. I mean, like I said, you and I both have landed at Mississippi Today, and I mean, my gosh, I've been there 2 years. You've been there for, I guess, 5 now, and we're at 5 years with Mississippi Today, and it's amazing the growth that we've had just in the last 2 or 3 years, and particularly the last couple of years. It's just been astronomical on that. I mean, you're enjoying yourself again. You're having fun. It's a good experience, right?
Oh, it's been terrific. It's been, I tell everybody who asks me about it, it's the best job I've ever had.
Yeah. Wow.
Best job I've ever had. I love what I do. I love where I do it. You know, it's probably, I would suspect this is the last job. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm not gonna say it's the last writing I'll ever do, but it's the last job I'm ever gonna have. And you know, how many times you get to say your last job is your best job?
You ever thought about writing a memoir?
Well, that's the one thing I have left on my list that I haven't done. I mean, I think I need to do it before I forget it all.
Yeah, that would probably help a little bit. I'm just laughing because I think about I can't even remember where my car keys are, so I'm pretty much past where I can do anything.
You know,
like
Marshall, it's so hard to write a book when you're writing, you know, for most of my career, it's been 3, 4, 5 columns a week.
Yeah.
It's just hard to, I don't have that thing where I can go from one thing. What I do have is a serious case of ADD. So that makes it even harder, you know.
Yeah, but I mean, that's the beauty, and I don't think people understand that. The beauty of working for a newspaper now for Mississippi Today is because we have those structured deadlines. And when you're like, when you have the ADD, and I'm the same way about the cartoons, it's nice. No, I have to have one by 5 o'clock every day. So there you go. My day's already set, you know, and have to have it finished. But I think the hardest thing creative, and I was going to ask you about writer's block if you ever get it, but I mean, for me personally, the hardest thing for me is not doing something, not writing or not drawing, and then suddenly having to draw after 2 weeks. Cause it's like, you know, trying to like run
Yeah,
through
and that's where my dad's old advice, that first bit of advice comes in handy for me, because if I'm having writer's block, if I think about getting the computer out of the way, the keyboard out of the way, and just how would I tell this story? That's what works, continues to work for me. But the book project, with Boo Ferris, I worked on it. I worked on that book for off and on for 3 years. But 80% of it was done when I finally just took a 1 month leave of absence and just did it. You know, that's what it's hard to go to and back and forth from one project to another for me.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I've always said that I probably need an air traffic controller, you know, somebody to
Well,
help.
you do with all the things you do at one time, but I'm astounded by that. I can't do it.
I think I'm just exhausted by it.
Yeah.
But like you, I mean, you know, the last 2 years and working with the team at Mississippi Today and the different things I've gotten to do with them, it's been really a lot of fun. And the staff, and one of the things, and I don't think people realize that, but we've kind of been scattered to the wind since the pandemic. Obviously, a lot of businesses have that can telecommute, but I look forward to the day when we're all back in the office.
Me too. I really am proud of what the Mississippi Today has been able to achieve in such a short period of time. And I'm proud of I think the role it played in getting the flag changed
Yeah.
finally in Mississippi. I'm actually proud of the role sports played in getting that,
Yeah.
making that happen. I'll never forget that day at the Capitol. That was the day I knew it was going to happen.
Yeah.
When all the coaches, all the athletic.
Yeah. When Lane Kiffin tweaked
Yeah.
Mike Leach's mask.
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
but you're right. Yeah. Because that's honestly, at the end of the day, I think people care about sports, and it's, it's just so much. And I'm trying to think, it's kind of the soundtrack of our life here, but soundtrack's probably not the right word. That's why you're a writer and I draw pictures.
It's a thread.
Yeah.
It's definitely a
Definitely.
thread, and it's definitely a huge part of Mississippi culture.
It gives us something to be proud of.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
That time when Mississippi State and Ole Miss were like 1-3 in the nation and everybody's winning. Oh my God, everybody was in a good mood in the state. I mean,
2014.
Yeah.
I had covered sports in Mississippi virtually for 50 years. And then I go to work at the Hall of Fame, and they decide to be number 1 and number 3. I covered a lot of Independence Bowls to miss the New Year's Day.
Usually snowing or raining, one of the two. On that miserable. Yeah, and too, the Saints win a Super Bowl. I mean, and all the success they've had in the last few years. And gosh, it's hard to see Drew Brees retire. I mean, the guy's got to be beat half to death. I mean, playing with broken ribs. If anybody's ever had a broken rib, you can't even breathe with that. Nevertheless, get out on the field. So
that night down in Miami, January 2009. Is that right? Yeah. I never thought I'd live to see that.
Yeah.
That was pretty special. I grew up with them. Again, Ace took my brother and I, Bobby, into the very first Saints game down at Tulane Stadium.
That's right.
John Gilliam returned that opening kickoff 92 yards for touchdowns, and we said, "Oh boy, this is going to be easy."
And it wasn't. Yeah.
But I was there when Dempsey kicked the 63-yard field goal, when Archie Circle left in for the touchdown to beat the Rams in his first game. But I was there for a lot of 1-15s and 3-13s. And
yeah.
A lot of heartbreak too. But
that was the thing. It's like we're talking about how sports can mean so much to a community or so much to a state, or in that case to a city, because here you are, you're recovering for Katrina. There wasn't a lot of good news. I mean, your mayor had just gotten tossed in the slammer. I mean, it was pretty dark times in New Orleans, and by God, the Saints, they pulled everybody up out of the debris and put them on their shoulders and carried them to recovery. I mean, it was just
special. And if you'll remember, they started that year training at Middlesex.
That's right. See, if they just did that every year, they'd win the Super Bowl every year.
There you go.
God, that was hot too. I remember that summer. I was just thinking, from playing football 500 years ago, I was thinking that had to be so miserable. I mean,
oh yeah, and you remember they were Cowboy Maloney's ran the deal where it was the season before, actually, that they ran the deal where if the Saints win the Super Bowl, you get a brand new TV. If you buy the TV now and the Saints win the Super Bowl, we'll give you your money back. You remember that?
Yeah.
And I wrote a column making fun of what a stupid idea that was, and then
I know
it almost happened. They made it to the NFC Finals that year before Chicago beat them.
Yeah, I would imagine Kahn and company probably would have been a
little. They had, but
they had an insurance policy. Yeah,
they hedged their bets pretty well.
Yeah, no, they're pretty smart about what they're doing. They always have been. Rick, I say, I mentioned you got a new computer. Congratulations. I don't even know what number computers or typewriters. Of course, you still have your first typewriter, don't you?
I still have that Underwood. It's up in my attic. The only place you find those things right now usually is in attics or museums.
You know, Tom Hanks like collects typewriters.
Yeah.
He's like a typewriter aficionado. He knows all about all manual typewriters. So
I've got like 4 or 5 of my old computers.
oh wow, that's just because you're a pack rat, though. I mean, because I don't know why you would. I mean, I could see Keith Warren keeping his. We mentioned Keith again. We worked with him at the Clarion Ledger.
No, we used to have to lug those typewriters and a telecopier
Yeah.
That would transmit the copy back to the paper. So you had your handful, and the press boxes didn't have elevators then. So you were carrying like 60 or 70 pounds up a mountain to do your job. And now I've got this little laptop that if there's a good wind, I can do a Frisbee with it.
Well, I think one of my favorite moments at the Clarion Ledger, we had the ATEX system when I first came there, which was pretty ancient system. That's the one that caught on fire when Bobby's computer caught on fire. You know, there was always an orange cone on top of one that was broken down. So the cone moved all around the newsroom. But then they came out with the new Mac-based system. And I remember Lee Baker, longtime editor, sports writer at the Clarion Ledger and probably the Jackson Daily News too, walked in and he just was like, hell no, I am not learning. And he retired that day. And I am so glad that when your computer broke, you didn't just say, hell no, I'm not going to do this anymore.
Yeah. You know, my career would have ended about 30 years ago had it not been for Orly.
Yeah. Wow, I didn't know that.
We were covering a basketball tournament on the coast, and Mississippi State was playing Alcorn. And we had those old porta bubbles. Do you remember? You're too young.
No, I didn't have those.
It was a precursor to a laptop. And but they were sensitive to sound, loud noise. And the Alcorn cheering section was right behind us. And they beat Mississippi State that night. And every time they would start that "Who Dat" chant, I would just have gibberish going at my my story that I was writing just turned into gibberish. And I picked that thing up and I put it over my head and I was fixing to heave it out to mid-court.
Yeah.
And Orly snatched it and he said, "You'll thank me later, Pards." And I'm sure I would have gone to jail and lost my job that night had that not happened.
Well, did Gannett own the paper at that point?
Yes.
Yeah, you would have lost your job and been thrown in jail.
Yeah, they had just I think, well, that might have been actually, I think it was in the period where the sale of the Huttermans to the Gannett was underway.
Yeah, we worked with a lot of really great people, and I think Orly, I'm so grateful I got to work with him and get to know him, and you know, I think about that. I just talk about somebody that just passed way too soon.
Oh God, yeah.
It still hurts. Yeah. His boys, who he is so proud of, are so successful, and I mean, it's just. But yeah, he was a great writer, and then you know, I saw where you did an interview recently with Billy Watkins, who. Billy can do probably the best interview of any human being on the planet. He's just so incredibly talented as a writer and as an interviewer because he just knows what to ask.
Just terrific. And we both of us learned a lot from Orly. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah, definitely. I remember we went to the Thai house when I first got here in 1996, and Orly made the statement I'll never forget. He just looked at everybody at the table and saying, "There's no way they can cut the paper anymore." It's like, well, I'd like to have that one on a plaque.
Yeah. How many bodies ago was that?
Yeah, but I mean, it was just, you know, like I said, I was very blessed to have David Hampton as an editor for 15 years. And, you know, I mean, we worked with Sekou Smith, who recently passed away from COVID. I'm still trying to get past that one. That one just makes me mad, to be honest with you. that he was taken from us that soon.
Yeah.
But, well, Rick, I appreciate you taking the time to talk. Well, I hate to leave on a sad note, but I'm proud that I still get to work with you. I'm proud that even though we probably see each other still once or twice a year, but I still really enjoy your work. And I'm just glad that you were able to sit down today and talk a little bit about some of the cool things you've gotten to see and do over the last few years.
Well, same here, Marshall. I can still think back to Sekou, covering high school games for us and smile about it,
Yeah.
and then he ends up, on national TV at Madison Square Garden.
Beloved by the NBA.
Loved by the NBA. Yeah, I'd like to think Mississippi had some influence there.
He would come into the paper and you could hear him literally coming up the stairs. He was just always laughing. And we worked with a gentleman named Bill Spencer, and it's like him teasing Bill Spencer every day was, I mean, I'm just so glad we got to sit next to the sports department, because it was just fun to sit back and watch all that. It was just great.
The zoo. It was the zoo.
It really was. It really was. Well, Rick, thank you again. And we'll look forward to seeing what you write next.
All right, buddy. You take care.
Take care. Thank you.